The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor. Ceramic shards scattered across the tiles like broken pieces of a life I didn't know was already falling apart. There, on my wife's phone screen, glowing with that cold, harsh blue light, was a text message that made my stomach drop straight to the floor. "Can't wait to feel you again, baby. Tonight at the Marriott, room 412. Wear the cologne I bought you, Jay. Before we go any further into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment, and hit that hype button so more people can find these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Will Drayton, 42 years old, senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, and apparently the biggest fool in all of suburban Chicago. There I was, standing in my own granite-countered kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, staring at evidence that my 15-year marriage had been nothing but a lie. And I felt something shift inside me, something cold and very, very still, like a door closing quietly in the middle of the night. Marta had left her phone on the counter while she showered, which she never did. That phone was usually glued to her palm like it had been surgically attached. But this morning, fate, or maybe just carelessness, made her slip up. And now I knew exactly why she'd been working so many late nights at the advertising agency. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the messages. Months and months of exchanges, explicit photos that made my eyes burn just to look at. Plans for weekend getaways she'd described to me as client retreats. And that cologne, the one she'd given me for Christmas, telling me she'd picked it out herself, was apparently meant for someone else entirely. Jake Turnbull. I knew that name. He was a minor local celebrity, a former college football player who now hosted a morning radio show and sold insurance on the side. Married to Dana Turnbull, a prosecutor in the district attorney's office. I'd met them both at neighborhood barbecues. I'd watched Jake's cocky smile dominate every conversation in the room. I'd noticed the way Marta's eyes would linger just a little too long on his athletic frame. I'd noticed, and then told myself I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining anything. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam would be fogging the bathroom mirror right about now. Marta would be going through her elaborate morning routine, the same one she'd performed every single day for 15 years, except now. I knew what she was really preparing for, another day of lies. I grabbed my own phone and started taking screenshots. Every message, every photo, every single piece of damning evidence. My background in finance had taught me one thing above everything else: document everything. And right now, I was building a case file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. The water stopped running upstairs. I heard Marta's footsteps on the hardwood floor, moving between the bathroom and our bedroom. Our bedroom, where she'd been lying next to me every night, while quietly planning her next rendezvous with Jake. I deleted every trace of my snooping from her phone, placed it back exactly where she'd left it. Then I swept up the broken mug, dumped the pieces in the trash, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at the breakfast bar with the Wall Street Journal. Like it was any other morning. 10 minutes later, Marta walked into the kitchen, wrapped in her silk robe, hair still damp from the shower. "Morning, honey," she said, and kissed my cheek, with lips that had probably been wrapped around another man less than 12 hours ago. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not looking up from the paper. "Big presentation today." She picked up her phone the moment she saw it, a reflex as automatic as breathing. I watched her face in my peripheral vision, and I saw it. That slight smile that crossed her lips as she read something, probably another message from Jake. "I'll be late tonight," she said casually, pouring herself a coffee. "Client dinner." "Which client?" I asked, just as casually. "Henderson Industries. You know how demanding they are. Henderson Industries." I'd actually helped her prepare for that account 3 years ago. They were based in Milwaukee. They almost never required evening meetings. Another lie delivered in exactly the same tone she used to ask me to take out the garbage. "Well, don't work too hard," I said, folding the paper and standing up. "I'd hate for you to wear yourself out." She looked at me sharply. Just for a second, like she was trying to detect something beneath the words. But I kept my face completely neutral. I'd spent years sitting in conference rooms full of executives trying to hide their company's disasters. Marta's deception was amateur hour compared to that. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my briefcase, headed for the garage. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced at the kitchen window. She was watching me, and she looked worried. Good, I thought, because Will Drayton, the boring, faithful husband she'd been cheating on, was about to become the most dangerous enemy she'd ever made. The drive to the office gave me time to think. 15 years of marriage, and I had been faithful every single day. I'd turned down advances from colleagues, ignored flirtations from neighbors. I had devoted myself completely to building the life Marta always said she wanted. The house in Riverside Oaks, the luxury cars, the country club membership, the vacation home in Wisconsin, all of it funded by my salary, while she played creative director at a mid-tier advertising agency. And this is how she repaid me, with lies, with hotel rooms, with another man's hands on her body. By the time I reached Morrison and Associates, the shock had crystallized into something harder, something sharper, something focused. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was not going to be the betrayed husband who begged for another chance, or quietly signed divorce papers and slipped away into irrelevance. No, I was going to be the architect of consequences, and Marta was going to learn that some doors should never have been opened. But first, I needed more information. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening, map out every player involved, identify every pressure point. In finance, we call it due diligence. In revenge, I suppose you'd call it planning. I spent my entire lunch break researching Jake Turnbull, his radio show, his insurance business, his social media. He was exactly the kind of man Marta would find irresistible, confident to the point of arrogance, physically imposing, a sort of easy, effortless charm that made people forget. He was essentially a mediocre ex-jock still trading on past glory. But more importantly, he was married to Dana Turnbull, a woman whose career depended entirely on her reputation for moral integrity. A prosecutor could not afford a scandal, especially not one involving adultery and public humiliation. Jake might think he was playing a casual game, but he was sitting on a powder keg, and he didn't even know it. I also looked into Marta's colleagues at the agency. Her boss, Richard Steinberg, was notorious for strict professional conduct. The company had fired 2 employees just in the past year for inappropriate workplace relationships. If evidence of Marta's affair became public, especially evidence of explicit communication sent during work hours, her career would be over faster than a bad commercial campaign. The pieces began falling into place. This wasn't going to be about screaming matches, no dramatic confrontations, no tearful ultimatums. This was going to be surgical, methodical, and absolutely devastating. Marta wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to learn she'd chosen the wrong opponent. That evening, I sat in my home office and organized every screenshot I'd taken, the messages, the photos, the planning conversations. I created encrypted folders, backed everything up to secure cloud storage, printed hard copies and locked them in my desk drawer. Evidence preservation. Lesson 1 from any legal thriller. Downstairs, I could hear Marta getting ready for her client dinner, the shower running again, the hairdryer humming, the careful, deliberate selection of an outfit. She was putting on a performance, just like she had been for months. But tonight was going to be the last time she lied to my face without consequences. When she came downstairs, she was wearing the black dress, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The irony was almost poetic. She'd accessorized it with jewelry I'd given her and perfume I'd purchased on a business trip to New York. Everything she was wearing had been paid for by my money, and every single piece of it was chosen to seduce another man. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slightly to show off the dress. "Beautiful," I said, and I meant it. She was beautiful. That's what made this cut so deep. Then the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Jake's a lucky man." Marta froze mid-spin. The color drained from her face right through the carefully applied makeup. "What did you say?" I looked up from my laptop with the most innocent expression I could manage. "I said you're a lucky woman. Henderson Industries is a great account." She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face, looking for something hidden beneath the surface. I kept my expression completely blank and returned my eyes to the screen. "I'll be home late," she said finally. "I'm sure you will be." After she left, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, settled into my leather chair, and sat with my thoughts for a while. The house felt different now, tainted. Every room had been quietly poisoned by what I now knew. The kitchen where she'd planned her affair, the bedroom where she'd lied beside me night after night, the living room where she'd probably texted Jake while I sat right next to her watching television. But I wasn't going to let her destroy what I had built. This house, this life, this future. None of it was going to be sacrificed on the altar of her selfishness. Instead, I was going to make sure she understood exactly what she had thrown away and exactly what it was going to cost her. My phone buzzed. A text from Greg Morrison, my best friend and the son of the firm's founding partner. "Poker night Friday. You in?" I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Absolutely. I'm feeling lucky." The next morning I called in sick to work. First time in 3 years. I told my assistant I had food poisoning and would be working from home. Then I settled into my office with a fresh pot of coffee and a legal pad. If I was going to dismantle my wife's carefully constructed double life, I needed to do it properly. First stop, Rena Kowalski, a private investigator I'd met 2 years earlier during a corporate fraud case. She was an ex-Chicago police detective who'd gone private after growing tired of department politics. Tough as nails, smart as hell, and completely without sentiment when it came to cheating spouses. Her office was tucked inside a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service, which honestly seemed perfectly appropriate for someone who made their living in other people's dirty laundry. Rena looked exactly like Central Casting would have ordered. Early 50s, graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, jeans and a blazer that couldn't quite conceal the shoulder holster underneath. "Will Drayton," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon. What can I do for you?" I handed her the thumb drive containing the screenshots from Marta's phone. "My wife is having an affair. I need documentation." Rena plugged the drive into her computer and spent 10 full minutes scrolling through the evidence. Her expression never changed, but I noticed her eyebrows rise slightly at some of the more explicit content. "Well," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, "you've already done half my job for me. This is pretty damning stuff. What exactly are you looking for?" "Everything," I said. "Financial records, timeline documentation, evidence of where they've been meeting. I want to know how long this has been going on, how much of my money she spent on it, and what kind of legal exposure I'm looking at." "You thinking divorce?" "I'm thinking nuclear war." Rena leaned back further and studied me the way she'd probably once studied suspects across an interrogation table. You seem pretty calm for a guy whose world just fell apart. I'm past the emotional stage, I said. Now I'm in the planning stage. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Those are usually the most dangerous clients. She picked up her pen. But okay, Will, let's burn this thing down. My rate is $500 a day plus expenses. I'll need a retainer. I wrote her a check for $5,000 without blinking. How long do you think you'll need? Give me a week. Maybe less. If they're as sloppy as these text messages suggest. While Rena worked her magic on the surveillance end, I focused on the financial side of Marta's betrayal. Our joint credit card statements told a story of deception that made my accountant's heart ache. Charges at Victoria's Secret for lingerie I had never once seen her wear. Expensive dinners at restaurants we had never visited together. Hotel room bookings scattered throughout her supposed business trips. Over just the past 6 months, she had spent nearly $8,000 of our money on this affair. But the real revelation came when I dug deeper into our investment accounts. Marta had been quietly, systematically moving money from our joint savings into a separate personal account I didn't even know existed. Small amounts. Never enough to catch my attention, but over the course of a year, it had added up to nearly $30,000. She'd been building herself an exit strategy, a nest egg for her new life with Jake. The betrayal was so complete, so cold, so calculated, that I actually laughed out loud sitting there at my desk. Marta wasn't just cheating on me, she was embezzling from our marriage. The woman who had promised to love, honor, and cherish me was systematically looting everything we had built together to fund an affair. That evening I confronted her. Quietly, carefully, with the subtlety of a chess player who already sees 12 moves ahead. "Honey," I said over dinner, "I was looking at our investment statements today. Did you move some money around recently?" She didn't even flinch. I transferred some funds to the money market account. Better interest rate. Which account? I don't see it on our statements. It's a new account. I haven't added you as a joint holder yet. Another lie, delivered with the same casual ease as everything else she'd been saying for months. I nodded, changed the subject, and spent the rest of dinner listening to her fabricate stories about clients and campaigns, while I mentally cataloged every single deception for future use. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I opened her laptop. The password was our anniversary date, which would have been touching if she weren't using the account to coordinate her infidelity. Her inbox was a treasure trove. Hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, exchanges with Jake that made my skin crawl. But the most interesting discovery was an email thread with her sister Linda, who lived out in Portland. Marta had been confiding everything to her, describing Jake as her soulmate, and describing me as a financial security blanket she was ready to discard. Linda had been encouraging the whole thing, even offering to let Marta stay with her during the divorce proceedings. The sisterly conspiracy added a whole new layer to what I was beginning to understand. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't some midlife crisis or an accident that got out of hand. This was a calculated campaign, a plan to replace me with someone more exciting while keeping me around just long enough to maximize the financial settlement. I forwarded the most damaging emails to a secure account, cleared the browser history, closed the laptop. Upstairs, I could hear Marta blow-drying her hair, getting ready for another evening built entirely on lies. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant another late night at the office, another hotel room rendezvous. But Friday was also poker night with Greg and the guys, and Greg Morrison, besides being my closest friend, was one of the best divorce attorneys in Chicago. It was time to start building my legal strategy. Friday evening found me in Greg's basement, surrounded by cigar smoke and the easy, comfortable banter of men who'd known each other since college. Besides Greg, there was Tom Fletcher, a real estate attorney. Mike Sullivan, a criminal defense lawyer, and Dave Chen, a corporate litigator. It was like having my own personal legal dream team sitting right around a poker table. I waited until we were 3 hands into the game before I dropped my bombshell. Hypothetically, I said, discarding 2 cards, what would you guys do if you discovered your wife was cheating? The table went quiet. Tom looked at me with concern. Mike nearly choked on his beer. This isn't hypothetical, is it? Greg said. I shook my head and told them everything. The text messages, the financial deception, the systematic, months-long betrayal. By the time I finished, Dave was taking notes on a legal pad, and Mike was already running strategy in his head. Jesus, Will, Tom said quietly. I'm sorry, man. That's brutal. How do you want to play this? Greg asked. Divorce is going to get ugly with this much deception involved. I don't want a divorce, I said. Not yet, anyway. I want her to understand what she's thrown away. I want her to feel the consequences of her choices before I decide whether to end the marriage. Mike leaned forward, his criminal defense instincts sharpening instantly. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Legal ones? Social ones? Professional ones? I want her affair exposed in a way that destroys her credibility and her reputation. I want Jake's wife to know exactly what her husband has been doing. I want Marta's boss to understand that she's been using company resources for personal business. And I want everyone in our social circle to know exactly what kind of person she really is. Dave looked up slowly from his notes. That's not revenge, Will. That's just truth. With consequences. Exactly. We spent the next 2 hours planning my campaign of truth-telling. Greg would prepare divorce papers as a backup plan, but wouldn't file them unless I gave the word. Tom would help me protect our assets and document Marta's financial deception. Mike would make sure everything I did stayed within legal boundaries. Dave would handle any corporate implications if Marta's employer decided to take action. You realize, Greg said as we were wrapping up for the night, once you start this, there's no going back. Your marriage is over either way. My marriage was over, I replied, the moment she decided to betray me. I'm just making sure she understands the price of that decision. Saturday morning, Rena called with her preliminary report. She'd been following Marta and Jake for 3 days straight, documenting their meetings, photographing their activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Hotel visits, restaurant dates, shopping trips where Jake bought her jewelry with what was probably his own wife's money. They're not even trying to be discreet, Rena said. Yesterday, they had lunch at a restaurant 2 blocks from his wife's office. Either they're incredibly stupid or they think they're completely untouchable. Probably both, I said. What about Jake's background? Interesting story there. He's been married to Dana for 12 years, but this isn't his first affair. I found evidence of at least 2 other relationships in the past 5 years alone. The guy's a serial cheater. Does his wife know? Hard to say. She's smart enough to figure it out if she wanted to, but prosecutors are good at compartmentalizing. She might be choosing not to see what she doesn't want to deal with. That's about to change. You want me to approach her? Not yet. I want to orchestrate this carefully. When Dana finds out about her husband's affairs, I want it to happen in a way that maximizes the impact on both of them. I spent the entire weekend planning my next moves. Marta was distracted and jumpy the whole time, probably sensing that something had shifted in our dynamic without being able to pinpoint exactly what. She kept asking if I was feeling okay, if something was wrong at work, if I was upset about anything. Each time, I assured her everything was fine, that I was just tired from the big presentation. Just tired. Sunday evening, while she was on the phone with her sister Linda, I made my first move. I created an anonymous email account and wrote a carefully worded message to Richard Steinberg, Marta's boss at the advertising agency. "Mr. Steinberg," I wrote, "I thought you should be aware that one of your employees has been using company resources for personal business. Marta Drayton has been conducting an extramarital affair using her company phone and email, meeting her lover during work hours, and charging personal expenses to company accounts. I've attached documentation you may find interesting." I signed it simply, "A concerned citizen." I attached selected screenshots of Marta's text messages, edited to remove anything too explicit, but more than clear enough to establish the nature of the relationship. I also included copies of credit card receipts showing charges to the company card for restaurants and hotels during times when Marta was supposedly meeting clients. The email was scheduled to send Monday morning at precisely 9 a.m., right when Steinberg would be sitting down to review his correspondence for the week. By the time Marta walked into that office, her boss would already be waiting for her, with questions she had absolutely no answers for. But that was just the opening move. I had much bigger plans for Jake Turnbull and his prosecutor wife, plans that would make Marta's workplace embarrassment look like a gentle warning shot. As I went to bed that Sunday night, listening to Marta's steady breathing beside me in the dark, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. A strange, quiet sense of peace. For months, I'd been living inside a world of lies without even knowing it. Now, finally, I was about to restore the balance. Truth was about to make a very significant comeback. Monday morning arrived with a kind of gray, drizzling weather that matched everything I was feeling perfectly. I was up at 5:30, sitting in the dark kitchen with my coffee and my laptop, watching the clock count down toward 9 a.m., toward the moment that email would land in Richard Steinberg's inbox. Marta's phone sat charging on the counter beside me, silent, innocent-looking, like a loaded gun, just waiting. At 6:15, I heard the shower start upstairs. Marta's morning routine, predictable as sunrise. 20 minutes in the shower, 10 minutes on her hair, 15 minutes on makeup, 5 minutes choosing an outfit that would look professional to her colleagues and enticing to Jake. I've been watching this performance for 15 years without ever realizing that's exactly what it was. A performance. Today, it was going to end. At 6:40, the shower stopped. I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and let the darkness of the kitchen settle around me like armor. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward since the morning that coffee mug slipped from my fingers. The moment Marta Drayton was going to learn that her husband wasn't the passive, trusting fool she'd taken him for. She came downstairs at 7:10, moving with that brisk, efficient energy of someone who had places to be and people to deceive. She was wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought her for Christmas, paired with the pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Even her betrayal was accessorized with my gifts. She flicked on the kitchen lights and stopped. "Jesus, Will, you scared me." She pressed her hand to her chest. "What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "Thinking," I said calmly. "We need to talk." Something in my tone made her go still. She looked at me more carefully, probably noticing for the first time that I was fully dressed at 7 in the morning, that my laptop was closed in front of me, that I was holding her phone in my hand. "Is that my phone?" she asked. "Yes, it is," along with some very interesting reading material. The color drained from her face. She reached out for it, but I pulled it back. "Trip's canceled," I said. "What trip? I don't know what you're talking about." "Room 412 at the Marriott. Tonight at 8. Jake's going to be very disappointed when you don't show up." Marta's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Will, I can explain." "No need to explain." My voice was level, almost gentle. "It's all very clear. 6 months of hotel rooms, restaurant dates, and shopping trips, all paid for with our money, of course. Jake's not just getting my wife, He's getting her at my expense. She started to speak. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. I want my phone back. And I want to know what gives you the right. Sit down, Marta. There was something in my voice that made her obey. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavily, her hands trembling on the table. Here's what's going to happen, I said, placing her phone on the counter between us. You're going to give me the passwords to all your accounts, email, social media, banking, everything. You're going to hand over your laptop. I paused. And you're going to lift up your dress. What? You heard me? Lift up your dress. I want to see what you're wearing underneath. I have a feeling it's not the cotton underwear you usually put on for work. I'm not going to You are. Or I'm going to forward every text message, every photo, and every email to Richard Steinberg right now. I'll also send them to the Chicago Tribune's gossip columnist, your mother, and every single person in your contact list. Your choice. Marta's face crumpled. Tears began streaming down through her carefully applied makeup, leaving dark tracks down her cheeks. But she stood up, and slowly, she lifted the hem of her dress. Red lace, a matching set I had never once seen before, probably purchased with our joint credit card for Jake's viewing pleasure. Very nice, I said, taking a photo with my own phone. Jake has expensive taste. Too bad he won't be seeing it tonight. Please, Will. I know how this looks, but I know how it looks too. My voice was still calm, conversational even, which seemed to frighten her more than shouting ever could have. It looks like my wife has been sleeping with another man for 6 months, while lying to my face every single day. It's not what you think. It's not just physical. Jake and I, we have a connection. We understand each other in ways that you and I never have. A connection. I let the words sit in the air for a moment. How romantic. Does his wife know about this connection? Marta's eyes went wide. You can't tell Dana. She's a prosecutor. It would ruin Jake's life. That's the idea. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. It was an email draft, addressed to Dana Turnbull at the district attorney's office. Attachments containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered about her husband's affair. One click, I said quietly, and Dana gets to see exactly what kind of man she married. Photographic evidence. A complete timeline of his activities. I imagine that would be very embarrassing for a prosecutor whose entire career depends on her reputation for moral integrity. You wouldn't? Try me. Marta stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. What do you want? I want you to understand what you've thrown away. I want you to feel the consequences of your choices, and I want you to know that your life, as you've known it, is over. I clicked send on the email to Dana, then opened another draft. That was your lover's wife. This one goes to your boss. Screenshots of your text messages. Documentation of your hotel visits during work hours. Copies of receipts showing you've been charging personal expenses to the company credit card. Richard will fire me. Yes, he will. Probably today. I sent that email too, then opened a third draft. And this one goes to your mother. All those photos you've been sending to Jake, along with some of his more colorful responses. I think Magda will be particularly interested in the one where you're wearing her grandmother's pearls while describing what you want to do to another woman's husband. Please don't send that to my mother. She'll disown me. She should. You're a disgrace to the family name. I sent the third email. Closed the laptop. All done. By 9 o'clock this morning, everyone important in your life will know exactly what kind of person you really are. Marta collapsed back into her chair, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just sharing the truth. You did this to yourself. The moment you decided to betray our marriage. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. This wasn't an accident. I stood up and walked slowly around the table toward her. She flinched as I approached, but I simply placed my hands on the back of her chair and leaned down to speak quietly, close to her ear. You've been systematically lying to me for months. You've been stealing money from our joint accounts. You've been building an exit strategy while pretending to be my loving wife. This was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. I straightened up. But here's the thing, Marta. I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm finished, you're going to wish you'd never met Jake Turnbull. You're going to wish you'd never betrayed me, and you're going to understand that there are consequences for destroying someone who loved you. I walked back to my side of the table and sat down. Now, you have two choices. You can go upstairs, pack a bag, and leave this house forever. Or you can stay, play the role of the repentant wife, and hope that someday I might consider forgiving you. But either way, your affair is over. Jake's life is about to become very complicated, and yours is about to become a living hell. What if I choose to leave? Then you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. I'll freeze every joint account, file for divorce on grounds of adultery, and make sure you don't see a single penny of my money in the settlement. You can go live with your sister Linda in Portland and start over with whatever Jake is willing to give you, assuming his wife doesn't take him for everything he's worth in their own divorce. And if I stay? If you stay, you follow my rules. You go where I tell you to go. You do what I tell you to do. You say what I tell you to say. You become the perfect wife. At least in public. And maybe, eventually, I'll decide whether our marriage is worth saving. Marta looked at me then, a look I'd never seen from her before. A strange mixture of fear and hatred that was, honestly, almost satisfying. You're enjoying this? Yes, I said simply. I am. For 6 months, you've been enjoying yourself at my expense. Now, it's my turn. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. I'll stay. Good choice. I kept my voice even, measured. Now, go upstairs and fix your makeup. You're going to work today, and you're going to face whatever Richard Steinberg has to say to you. You're going to apologize, beg for your job, and accept whatever consequences he decides to impose. And tonight, you're going to come home and tell me exactly how it went. She stood up slowly, like an old woman rising from a chair she wasn't sure she had the strength to leave. What about Jake? Jake is no longer your concern. You're going to text him right now and tell him the affair is over. You're never going to see him again, never going to speak to him again, never going to think about him again. He's about to have much bigger problems than losing his married girlfriend. I handed her the phone. She took it with trembling fingers and typed, "It's over. Don't contact me again. My husband knows everything. Send it," I said. She hesitated, just for a moment, then pressed send. A few seconds later, the phone buzzed. Jake's response. "What are you talking about?" I took the phone from her hands and typed back, "This is Will Drayton, Marta's husband. Your wife will be receiving some very interesting emails this morning. I suggest you lawyer up." His response came back immediately. "You bastard." I showed it to Marta, then deleted the entire conversation thread. And that's the last time you'll ever hear from your soulmate. Now, go get ready for work. You have a very interesting day ahead of you. She walked toward the stairs like she was heading to her own execution. At the bottom step, she turned back. "I did love you, Will." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I still do." "No," I said quietly. "You don't. You love the security I provided. You love the lifestyle I made possible, but you never loved me enough to stay faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. That's not love, Marta. That's just convenience." She started to respond. I held up my hand. "Go to work. Face the consequences. And remember, this is just day one. Things are going to get much worse before they get better." As she disappeared upstairs, I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I had emails to send, phone calls to make, and a reputation to dismantle piece by piece. Jake Turnbull was about to learn that stealing another man's wife came with a price tag he couldn't begin to afford, and Marta was about to discover that betraying someone who genuinely loved her was the biggest mistake of her life. The kitchen was quiet again, but it felt different now. The lies had been exposed. The truth had been spoken. The consequences were already in motion. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. It was going to be a very interesting day. By 10:30 that morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call came from Richard Steinberg himself, Marta's boss at the advertising agency. His voice was tight, controlled, barely containing the anger underneath. "Mr. Drayton, I need to speak with you about your wife's employment situation." "I figured you might," I said calmly. "I assume you received my email." "I did, and I have to say, this is one of the most disturbing situations I've encountered in 20 years of running this company. Using company resources for personal affairs, charging personal expenses to corporate accounts, conducting inappropriate relationships during work hours. It's grounds for immediate termination. I understand completely. What do you need from me?" "Documentation. If we're going to fire her for cause, I need everything you can provide. Text messages, receipts, timeline evidence. Our legal department wants to make sure we're fully covered in case she tries to claim wrongful termination." I spent the next hour on the phone with Steinberg and his lawyers, walking them through every piece of evidence I'd gathered. By the end of that conversation, Marta's career in advertising was effectively over. Word would spread through the industry within days. No reputable agency would hire someone who'd been fired for conducting affairs on company time. The second call came from Dana Turnbull. Her voice was ice-cold, professional, the measured tone of a prosecutor who had just discovered a brand-new case. "Mr. Drayton, I received your email this morning. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the situation." "Of course. When and where?" "My office. 2:00 today." A brief pause. "And Mr. Drayton, bring everything you have." Dana's office in the district attorney's building was exactly what I'd imagined. Diplomas on the walls, law books lying neatly on the shelves, the kind of organized, precise efficiency that came from years of prosecuting criminals for a living. She was an attractive woman in her early 40s. Steel gray eyes. The kind of controlled, quiet demeanor that probably made defense attorneys very nervous. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I have to say, your email was quite illuminating. I thought you should know what your husband has been doing." "How long have you known about the affair?" "I discovered it 3 days ago, but based on the evidence I've gathered, it's been going on for at least 6 months." She nodded, making notes on her legal pad without looking up. "And this isn't Jake's first extramarital relationship. According to my private investigator, he's had at least 2 other affairs in the past 5 years. Apparently your husband has a pattern of behavior." Dana's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "But I noticed." "I see." She set down her pen. "And what exactly do you want from me, Mr. Drayton?" "Nothing," I said. "I just thought you deserved to know the truth about the man you're married to." "The truth?" She leaned back slowly in her chair and studied me, the way she probably studied hostile witnesses. You realize that destroying my marriage doesn't undo the damage to yours. I'm not trying to destroy your marriage. I'm just sharing information. What you do with it is your choice. But you are trying to destroy my husband. Your husband destroyed himself the moment he decided to sleep with my wife. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that decision." Dana was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened a file folder on her desk. "I've been married to Jake for 12 years. I've suspected his infidelity for at least half that time, but I chose to ignore it for the sake of our stability. Prosecutors can't afford messy personal lives, and divorce would have been complicated. And now? Now I have documentation that makes ignoring it impossible." She looked down at the papers in front of her. "Jake has been using our joint credit cards to fund his affairs, which constitutes financial fraud. He's been lying under oath about his whereabouts, which could affect cases where his testimony was material. And he's been conducting these relationships while representing himself as a family man in his insurance business, which could constitute consumer fraud." I felt a cold smile spreading slowly across my face. "Sounds like he's in some serious legal trouble." "He will be." Dana's voice was completely steady. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm going to make sure he loses everything. His business, his reputation, his financial assets, all of it. By the time I'm done with Jake Turnbull, he'll be lucky to find work selling used cars." "What about Marta?" She considered for a moment. "Your wife is a victim in this situation, Mr. Drayton. Jake pursued her, manipulated her, and used her for his own gratification. I don't hold her responsible for my husband's predatory behavior." I laughed. A short, quiet sound. Dana raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Mrs. Turnbull, you don't know my wife very well. Marta wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant who knew exactly what she was doing." "Perhaps," Dana said evenly, "but legally speaking, she's not my concern. Jake is." As I left Dana's office, I felt a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. Jake's life was about to become a full legal nightmare, and he had brought every single bit of it on himself. But Dana was wrong about one thing. Marta was not going to walk away clean just because she was technically the other woman rather than the cheating spouse. I had plans for Marta that would make her wish she'd never heard Jake Turnbull's name. That evening, I was sitting in the living room when I heard her key in the door. She came in looking like she'd survived a natural disaster. Eyes red and swollen, hair disheveled, the kind of exhaustion on her face that aged a person in real time. She looked like she'd lost 5 years in 8 hours. "How did it go?" I asked pleasantly. She dropped into the armchair across from me. "They fired me." Her voice was hollow, empty. "Richard called me into his office at 9:30 and terminated me immediately. Security escorted me out of the building. Like I was a criminal." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, "although I can't say I'm surprised. They're also going after me for the money I charged to the company card. They want full restitution, plus penalties. It's going to be almost $15,000. That's unfortunate. I hope you have that much in your personal account." She looked at me with desperation filling her eyes. "You know I don't." "Will, please. I know I made mistakes, but I can't pay that back without help. They're threatening to file criminal charges if I don't pay within 30 days. Then you'd better start looking for a new job quickly." "Who's going to hire me?" Her voice broke slightly. "Richard is telling everyone in the industry what happened. I'm blacklisted." I shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore. You made these choices, Marta. Now you get to live with the consequences." She started crying again, the kind of desperate, unraveling sobs that come from someone whose entire world is collapsing and they can finally feel it happening. "What about Jake? Have you heard from him?" "No, But I imagine he's having a very interesting conversation with his wife right about now. Dana seemed extremely motivated to make sure he pays for what he's done. You told his wife. I told his wife everything. Text messages, photos, timeline, financial records, the complete package. She's filing for divorce tomorrow and pursuing criminal fraud charges. Jake's about to lose his business, his house, and his reputation. Congratulations, Marta. You picked a real winner. The color drained completely from her face. Criminal charges? Apparently, using joint credit cards to fund extramarital affairs constitutes financial fraud. Who knew? And since Jake's been lying about his activities under oath in various legal proceedings, he's also looking at perjury charges. Dana is a very thorough prosecutor. Marta buried her face in her hands. This is a nightmare. No, I said simply. This is justice. You and Jake thought you could betray your spouses without any consequences. You were wrong. I stood up and walked slowly over to where she was sitting. But here's the thing, Marta. Jake's problems are just beginning. And so are yours. Because tomorrow, I'm going to start phase 2 of your education and consequences. She looked up at me, eyes swollen, searching. What's phase 2? Social destruction. Everyone in our neighborhood, everyone at the country club, everyone in our social circle. They're all going to know exactly what kind of person you are. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face anywhere in this city without people whispering about what you did. Will, please. Her voice dropped to something raw and small. I get it. I understand that I hurt you. But this has gone far enough. Can't we try to work things out? Can't we go to counseling or something? I laughed again. That same cold, quiet sound. Counseling. You want to go to counseling? After 6 months of systematic betrayal, financial theft, and pathological lying, you think a few therapy sessions are going to fix this? I'm willing to try anything. She looked at me with everything she had left. I love you, Will. I know I have a terrible way of showing it, but I do. I love you. You love my money, I said. You love the security I provide. You love the lifestyle I've made possible. But you don't love me, Marta. If you loved me, you never would have done this. I walked back to my chair and sat down, calm, settled, unhurried. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to start looking for any job you can find. Retail, food service, cleaning offices, whatever will pay you enough to cover your share of the household expenses and start paying back the money you stole from your employer. My share of the expenses? Did you think I was going to keep supporting you after what you've done? You're going to pay for your own food, your own clothes, your own gas, and half of the household bills. You're also going to pay me back the $8,000 you spent on your affair, plus interest. I can't afford all of that on a minimum wage job. Then you'd better find 2 minimum wage jobs, or 3. I really don't care how you manage it, as long as you manage it. She stared at me, the shock slowly giving way to a dawning terrible understanding. You're not going to divorce me. Not yet. Divorce would be too easy for you. You'd get half our assets, spousal support, and the chance to start over somewhere else. I'm not going to reward your betrayal with a financial settlement. Then what do you want? I want you to understand what you threw away. I want you to experience the consequences of your choices. And I want you to spend every day for the foreseeable future regretting what you did to our marriage. Rewritten script Part 4 Natural audio narration style. I headed for the stairs, then paused at the bottom step. Oh, and Marta. She looked up. Tomorrow morning, I'm having the locks changed on the house. You'll get 1 key, and if you lose it, or make copies, you'll be sleeping in your car. I'm also having a security system installed. Cameras in every room except the bathrooms. I want to make sure you're not tempted to do anything else. Stupid. You're going to spy on me? In my own home? This isn't your home anymore." My voice was quiet, final. "This is my home, where you are living as a guest. And guests follow the rules. Or they get asked to leave." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear her crying behind me. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no impulse to turn around and comfort her. Marta had made her choices. Now she was going to live with them. Tomorrow would bring new humiliations, new consequences, new reminders of exactly what her betrayal had cost her. And I was going to be there for every single moment of it. After all, revenge is supposed to be satisfying. And so far, it was exceeding every expectation I had. 3 weeks later, Marta was working double shifts at a discount clothing store in a strip mall 20 minutes from our neighborhood. The commute in her 10-year-old Honda Civic took an hour each way. She was making barely enough money to cover the share of expenses I'd imposed on her. The woman who had once managed million-dollar advertising campaigns was now folding clearance dresses for $12 an hour. But that was just the financial component of her punishment. The social destruction had been far more comprehensive and infinitely more satisfying. It started with our neighbor, Sharon Kellerman, the self-appointed queen of Riverside Oaks gossip. I invited her over for coffee, and with what appeared to be great reluctance, shared the difficult situation I was dealing with regarding Marta's infidelity. Sharon's eyes lit up like Christmas morning as I carefully provided edited details about the affair, the financial deception, Marta's termination from her job. "I had no idea," Sharon said, though her tone suggested she was absolutely delighted to finally have confirmation of what she'd probably suspected for months. "Poor Will. How are you holding up?" "It's been challenging," I said, with exactly the right amount of wounded dignity. "I'm trying to decide whether the marriage can be salvaged, but the betrayal runs so deep. Within 24 hours, every person in our social circle knew about Marta's affair. The story grew in the telling, the way gossip always does, until Marta was being portrayed as a predatory homewrecker who had seduced an innocent married man and stolen thousands of dollars from her employer to fund lavish shopping sprees. The country club was the most brutal venue for Marta's social execution. When she accompanied me to the monthly dinner dance, thinking that maintaining appearances might somehow help her situation, she was met with a wall of cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped the moment she approached. Women who had been her friends for years suddenly had urgent business elsewhere whenever she tried to join their conversations. The final blow came when Margaret Petton approached our table during dinner, the club president's wife, a woman who could deliver social assassination with a smile. "Marta, dear," she said, with exactly the kind of false sweetness that preceded complete destruction, "I wanted to let you know that the membership committee has decided to suspend your volunteer privileges pending resolution of your situation. We simply can't have someone with questionable moral character representing the club at charity events." Marta's face went white. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all." Margaret's smile didn't waver. "We've heard quite detailed accounts of your behavior, and frankly, it's not the kind of example we want to set for the younger members." After Margaret walked away, Marta turned to me, tears filling her eyes. "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I had a feeling it might," I said, cutting my steak with deliberate, unhurried precision. "Actions have consequences, Marta. You're just beginning to understand what those consequences look like." But the country club humiliation was nothing compared to what happened when Jake Turnbull finally decided to make his desperate play for redemption. It was a Thursday evening. I was in my home office reviewing financial reports. Marta was at work, pulling her second shift of the day. The doorbell rang. I answered it myself. Jake stood on my front porch, looking like a man who had aged an entire decade in 3 weeks. Dana's legal assault had been even more devastating than I'd hoped. She'd frozen all of Jake's accounts, filed for divorce with a demand for full asset forfeiture, and convinced the district attorney's office to pursue fraud charges related to his misuse of joint credit cards. His insurance business was under investigation, his radio show had been canceled, and he was now facing the very real possibility of actual jail time. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What's on your mind, Jake?" "You've destroyed my life." "You destroyed your own life when you decided to sleep with my wife." I just made sure there were consequences. He was bigger than me, more athletic, probably capable of doing serious damage if he decided to get physical. But he didn't look dangerous standing there on my porch. He looked broken, defeated, like a man who had finally fully understood the scope of everything he'd lost. "Dana's going to take everything." His voice was hollow. "The house, the business, the cars, all of it. She's also pushing for criminal charges that could put me in prison for 5 years. Sounds like you should have thought about that before you started your affair. It wasn't supposed to go this far." He shook his head slowly. It was just supposed to be fun. Something exciting. "I never meant to hurt anyone," I laughed. That same cold, quiet sound. "You never meant to hurt anyone? What exactly did you think was going to happen, Jake? Did you think you could sleep with another man's wife indefinitely, without consequences? I thought if we were careful, if we were discreet." "You thought you were smarter than everyone else." I looked at him steadily. "You thought you were entitled to take whatever you wanted without ever paying the price. You were wrong." Jake's shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me? Money? An apology? I'll do whatever you want. Just call off your wife. Tell her to back down on the criminal charges. Dana isn't my wife, Jake. She's your wife. And she's doing exactly what any intelligent woman would do when she discovers her husband has been systematically betraying her for years." "Years?" He looked up sharply. "It wasn't years. The thing with Marta only lasted 6 months. But Marta wasn't your first affair, was she?" A long pause. "Dana told me about the others. She's been building a case against you for a long time, and my evidence just gave her the ammunition she needed to pull the trigger." The realization spread across his face slowly, like a man watching the ground open up beneath him. She knew about the others. She suspected, but suspicion isn't proof, and Dana's a prosecutor. She needed evidence that would hold up in court. Thanks to your affair with Marta, she now has more evidence than she knows what to do with. Jake's face crumpled. "My life is over." "Yes," I said simply, "it is. You're going to lose your house, your business, and probably your freedom. You're going to be a middle-aged ex-convict with no money, no prospects, and a reputation that will follow you everywhere you go. Congratulations, Jake. You traded all of that for 6 months with my wife." He stared at the ground for a long moment, then looked up. "Was it worth it?" His voice was almost desperate. "Destroying 2 marriages, ruining 4 lives. Was your revenge worth all of that?" I considered the question, genuinely. "You know what, Jake? It really was. Because you didn't just sleep with my wife. You made me look like a fool. You made me the cuckold who was too stupid to see what was happening in his own home. You took something that belonged to me and used it for your own gratification." "Marta doesn't belong to you," he said quietly. "She's not property. No, she's not property. But she was my wife, and that meant something. It meant loyalty, fidelity, respect. You helped her violate every single one of those commitments. And now, you're both going to pay the price." Jake turned to leave. then stopped, looked back at me one more time. What about Marta? What's going to happen to her? Marta's going to spend the next few years learning what it means to live without the security and comfort I provided. She's going to work minimum wage jobs, live paycheck to paycheck, and be reminded every single day of what her betrayal cost her. I paused. And then, maybe, if she's learned her lesson, and if I decide she's suffered enough, I might consider forgiving her, or I might decide that some betrayals are unforgivable, and file for divorce. I haven't made up my mind yet. You're a cold bastard, Will. No, Jake. I'm just a man who refuses to be victimized without consequences. You and Marta thought you could betray me and walk away unscathed. You were wrong. After Jake left, I went back inside and poured myself a bourbon. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been since the morning I discovered Marta's affair. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely, genuinely in control. An hour later, Marta came home from her evening shift. Exhausted, defeated. She looked at me sitting in my leather chair with my drink and my newspaper, and I saw something flash in her eyes, something that looked very much like hatred. Jake came by, I said, without looking up from the financial section. She froze in the doorway. What did he want? To beg me to call off Dana's legal assault. Apparently, he's finally realized that actions have consequences. What did you tell him? I told him his problems were his own fault, and that he should have thought about the consequences before he decided to sleep with you. Marta walked slowly over to the bar and poured herself a glass of wine. Her hands were shaking. How long is this going to go on, Will? How long is what going to go on? This. Her voice was raw. The punishment, the humiliation, the constant reminders of what I did. How long before you either forgive me or divorce me? I folded my newspaper and looked at her directly. That depends entirely on you, Marta. When I'm satisfied that you understand the full scope of what you threw away, and when I'm convinced that you've truly learned your lesson, then I'll make a decision about our future. And how will you know when that happens? I'll know. She drank her wine in silence for several long minutes. Then she set down the glass and looked at me with something approaching her old defiance. You know what, Will? You're right. Her voice was steadier now. I did betray you. I did lie to you. I did steal money from our joint accounts and spend it on another man. I did all of those things, and I deserve to be punished for them. Yes, you do. But you know what else? She held my gaze. You're enjoying this too much. You're taking too much pleasure in my suffering. That's not justice, Will. That's cruelty. I stood up slowly, walked over to where she was standing. You want to know what cruelty is, Marta? Cruelty is lying to someone who loves you, every single day, for 6 months. Cruelty is stealing money from your joint accounts to fund an affair. Cruelty is making your husband look like a fool while you laugh about it with your lover. I never laughed about you with Jake. I read your text messages, remember? I kept my voice even. I saw what you said about me, about our marriage, about how boring and predictable I was compared to your exciting new boyfriend. Her face flushed. Those were just things I said in the heat of the moment. No, they weren't. They were your true feelings, expressed when you thought no one would ever see them. And now I know exactly what you really think of me. So what happens now? She asked quietly. Walked back to my chair and sat down. Now you go upstairs, take a shower, get ready for another day of minimum wage work and social ostracism. And I continue to decide whether you're worth the effort of forgiveness. And if you decide I'm not, then you'll find out what it's like to start over with nothing but the clothes on your back and the reputation you've earned. Marta stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, She paused and looked back. I did love you, Will. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Despite everything, I did love you. No, Marta. You loved what I could give you. You loved the security, the comfort, the lifestyle. But you never loved me enough to be faithful, and you never respected me enough to be honest. I looked at her steadily. That's not love. That's just selfishness, with better marketing. As she disappeared upstairs, I returned to my newspaper and my bourbon. Outside, it had started to rain. The kind of steady, heavy downpour that washes the streets completely clean and leaves everything looking fresh and new in the morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities. But tonight, I was content to sit in my chair, in my house, surrounded by the life I had built and the control I had reclaimed. Jake Turnbull was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Marta was working retail and living as a social pariah, and I was exactly where I belonged, in complete control of the consequences of their betrayal. It had been a very satisfying few weeks, and I had a feeling the best was still yet to come. 6 months after the kitchen confrontation that changed everything, I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce papers. Greg Morrison looked across his mahogany desk at me with the expression of someone who had just witnessed the most methodical, deliberate dismantling of a marriage he had ever seen in his entire career. "Are you sure about this, Will?" he asked. "After everything." Rewritten script, Part 5, final natural audio narration style. After everything you've put her through, Greg said carefully. Marta might actually have learned her lesson. She's been working 2 jobs, paying you back, and she hasn't so much as looked at another man. She's learned not to get caught, I corrected. That's not the same thing as learning her lesson. But the truth was more complicated than I was willing to admit to Greg. Over the past 6 months, I had watched Marta transform. The entitled, deceptive woman who had betrayed our marriage had slowly become someone who understood the real value of hard work and the true cost of betrayal. She had paid back every single penny she'd stolen, from me and from her former employer. She had endured the social ostracism with a quiet dignity I genuinely hadn't expected from her, and she had never once, not one single time, complained about the consequences I'd imposed. But every time I looked at her, I saw the woman who had lied to my face for 6 months while quietly planning her exit strategy. Every time she spoke, I heard the voice that had whispered sweet lies to another man. Every time she touched me, I felt the hands that had betrayed everything we'd promised each other. Some betrayals, I had come to understand, are simply unforgivable. "The papers are ready," Greg said. "No-fault divorce, equal division of assets. She'll get half of everything, plus spousal support for 3 years. She'll get exactly what the law requires," I said, "and not a penny more." "Will? She's been through hell, don't you think?" "She put herself through hell when she decided to cheat on me. I just made sure she understood the consequences." Greg signed the papers and slid them across the desk. He looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. "You've changed. This whole experience has made you harder." "No, Greg. This experience has made me smarter. I spent 15 years trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I won't make that mistake again." That evening, I found Marta in the kitchen preparing dinner after her shift at the department store. She had lost weight over the past 6 months. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The woman who had once spent hundreds of dollars on salon treatments and designer clothes was now shopping at thrift stores and cutting her own hair. I placed the divorce papers on the counter without a word. She looked at them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I've been expecting this." "Have you?" "You've had your revenge, Will." Her voice was quiet, resigned. "You've made me pay for what I did in every way possible. I didn't think you'd want to stay married to someone you despise. I don't despise you, Marta. I despise what you did. There's a difference. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had confronted her 6 months ago. What happens now? Now you sign the papers, and we both move on with our lives. You'll get half of our assets. That should be enough to start over somewhere else. I'd recommend Portland. Your sister Linda is still willing to take you in, and no one there knows about your affair. What about you? She asked. What will you do? I'll sell this house. Buy something smaller. Maybe travel for a while. I've got vacation time saved up. She picked up the divorce papers and flipped through them slowly. Equal division of assets. She almost seemed surprised. That's more generous than I expected. It's what the law requires. Nothing more, nothing less. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me. Will? I know you'll probably never believe this, but I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught. Sorry for what I did to you, to us, to our marriage. You didn't deserve any of it. I sat down across from her, studying her face carefully, looking, out of habit, for signs of deception. But all I saw was exhaustion, and something that looked very much like genuine regret. Why, Marta. My voice came out quieter than I intended. After 15 years, why did you throw it all away? She was silent for a long time, just staring at her hands folded on the table. I felt invisible. She said it softly, like I was just going through the motions of being your wife without actually living. Jake made me feel alive. Again, made me feel desirable, exciting. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. You could have talked to me, I said. We could have gone to counseling, taken a vacation, done something to reconnect. Instead, you chose to betray me. I know. Her voice barely held, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life. She signed the papers with steady hands, then slid them back across the table. There, it's done. It was done 6 months ago, Marta. This is just making it official. We sat in silence for several minutes. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legal documents and a quiet conversation in a kitchen. I heard about Jake, she said finally. Jake Turnbull's downfall had been even more spectacular than I'd hoped. Dana's legal assault had destroyed him financially and professionally. He'd been convicted of fraud and sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. His insurance business had been liquidated to pay his debts. He'd lost the house, the cars, and whatever reputation he'd had left. The last I'd heard, he was working in a prison kitchen, eligible for parole in 6 months. What about him? Dana divorced him and took everything. He's in federal prison, and when he gets out, he'll have nothing. No money, no business, no prospects. His life is completely ruined. Yes, it is. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Destroying him so completely? Jake made a choice when he decided to pursue you. He knew you were married, knew he was married, knew that affairs have consequences. He chose to take the risk. And now he's paying the price. But don't you feel any sympathy for him? Any regret about what happened? No. Jake got exactly what he deserved. A pause. So did you. Marta flinched, as if I'd physically struck her. I deserve to lose my job, my friends, my reputation, and my marriage? You deserve the consequences of your choices. If those consequences were severe, it's because your betrayal was severe. And now, she said slowly, do you feel like justice has been served? I thought about it seriously. Over the past 6 months, I had watched both Marta and Jake pay the full price for what they'd done. Jake was sitting in a federal prison. Marta had lost her career, her social standing, and now her marriage. Their affair had cost them both far more than they had ever imagined possible. "Yes," I said finally, "justice has been served." "Then why don't you look satisfied?" She studied me carefully. "Why do you look like a man who's won a war but lost something important in the process?" It was a perceptive question, one I had been carefully avoiding asking myself. The truth was, my revenge had been complete, absolute, devastating, but it hadn't brought me the satisfaction I'd expected. I had destroyed 2 lives, ended my marriage, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. "Because," I said slowly, "winning doesn't always feel like winning when the cost is this high." "Then why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you choose revenge over forgiveness?" "Because some betrayals are unforgivable, Marta. What you did to me, to us, to our marriage. It crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." She nodded, tears falling quietly now. "I understand, and I accept it." "But Will?" She looked at me with steady, reddened eyes. "I want you to know that despite everything that's happened, despite all the pain and humiliation and consequences, I don't regret loving you. I regret betraying you, but I don't regret the 15 years we had together." I sat with that for a moment. "Neither do I admitted. "But those 15 years are over now. We both have to find a way to move forward." She was quiet. Then, gently, "Will you be able to move forward? I mean, will this bitterness consume you?" It was another question I had been avoiding. The past 6 months had changed me in ways I was only beginning to fully understand. I had discovered I was capable of a level of calculation and ruthlessness that surprised even me. I had systematically dismantled 2 lives without losing a single moment's sleep. That kind of thing leaves marks on a person's soul. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I guess I'll find out." Marta stood up, walked slowly around the table to where I was sitting. For a moment, I thought she was going to try to kiss me, or make one final plea for reconciliation. Instead, she placed her hand gently on my shoulder and squeezed, just once. "I hope you find peace, Will." Her voice was soft. "I hope you find someone who deserves your loyalty and never makes you question it. And I hope that someday you can forgive me, even if you can never forget what I did." Then she walked upstairs to pack her belongings, leaving me alone in the kitchen, where everything had started 6 months ago. 2 hours later, she came back downstairs. 2 suitcases. Her purse. She had left her wedding ring on the counter beside the divorce papers. "I'll send someone for the rest of my things next week," she said. "Where will you go?" "Portland, like you suggested. Linda's expecting me, and there's a job waiting at a marketing firm there." A small, tired breath. "It's not much, but it's a start." She walked to the front door, then turned back, one last time. "Goodbye, Will." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Despite everything, I'm glad I got to love you, even if I didn't do it very well." And then, she was gone. The front door closed quietly behind her, leaving me alone in the house we had shared for 15 years. I poured myself a bourbon, settled into my leather chair, surrounded by the silence of victory. Jake Turnbull was in prison. Marta was starting over with nothing. I had my house, my money, my dignity. I had won, completely, decisively, without compromise. So why did it feel so much like losing? Outside, it had started to rain again, and I realized, for the first time in 6 months, I had absolutely no idea what came next. My revenge was complete, my marriage was over, and my future was a blank slate. I raised my glass slowly, in a silent toast, to the empty house, and the hollow victory I had fought so hard to achieve. "Some safes," I said quietly, to the silence around me, "should never be opened." A long pause. But then again, some people shouldn't have locked them in the first place. The end.